Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Emily Cash with the FreightWaves Media team, and I'm happy to present this webinar in partnership with Trucker Tools. Today, we will discuss strategies that set your brokerage up for success in 2024 and beyond. I'm happy to be joined by Carrie Jablonski, CEO at Trucker Tools, Sean McGillicuddy, Chief Revenue Officer at Tai Software, Matt Newcomb, Director of Operations at ARL Network, and my colleague, Mary O'Connell, freight broker, 3PL expert at FreightWaves. We'll also have a live Q&A following the discussion, so make sure to have your questions ready for our presenters. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to access the help section in your webinar console. If you have questions that you would like to ask our presenters, please enter those in the Q&A box of your console, and we will answer as many of those as possible during the live audience Q&A following the discussion. We'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow if you'd like to view it on demand or share it to colleagues. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mary to kick off today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Emily, for all of those housekeeping things. As Emily mentioned today, we are kind of looking at some of the key trends and practices for the day, and we are joined by an amazing cast of people here. So two of the main things that we're going to go over today is kind of the favorite statement that everyone has is, when does the freight market change? When is this flip going to happen? And then also kind of how to stop having reactive approaches and have a more proactive approach to prepare your brokerage for what we need. But today we are joined, as Emily said, by some amazing people. Let's start it off. Carrie, give us some background about yourself.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks everyone for joining us. So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet watching, thank you. And to introduce myself, Carrie Jablonski. I'm the CEO of Trucker Tools. We are a carrier-forward visibility and capacity platform. We work with brokers to digitize their workflow and automate a lot of their core tasks, help them find and connect with great carriers, and drive visibility compliance up. I'm based in Chicago, and I'm really grateful to not just have Mary on here moderating, but also Sean and Matt. Sean's an awesome partner of ours, and Matt's a great customer. So I'll pass it over to them. Sean, why don't you take it?
Oh, Sean, we can't hear you. Are you by chance muted?
Sorry, I had my mic muted. So thanks for having me on. I'm Sean McGillicuddy. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Tai Software. We are a freight broker TMS. We're actually the fastest growing freight broker TMS over the last 4 years in the industry. And I believe we're the only ones right now doing LTL and truckload at a really high level. And I'm happy to be on with Trucker Tools as a great partner and ARL as a great client of ours.
Matt, why don't you give us some background on you?
Sure. So my name is Matt Newcomb. I'm Director of Operations here at ARL. ARL Network has a 3PL division and an asset division. We're both based in Pittsburgh, PA. Mostly drayage is our forefront, but we do a ton of flatbed as well.
Awesome. And then Matt, do you mind just kind of expanding a little bit on what exactly ARL does and give a little overview of the network, areas that your strengths in, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So ARL Transport has over 800 assets. Like I said, mostly tie into drayage. We're really strong in New Jersey, Chicago, Georgia. We do warehousing across the U.S. North Carolina is a very strong spot for us as well. We've been in business for over 40 years and have a great relationship with both Tai and Trucker Tools. We've been partners with them for about 5-6 years now. And yeah, we're very excited about this upcoming year with the logistics market.
Awesome. I absolutely love that. Let's just kind of jump into our main first topic here. So something everybody has been talking about since 2020, 2021 has been, we have this huge boom cycle, but when is that bust cycle going to happen? And when are we going to finally get out of these less than ideal freight market rates? And what do we expect next? What is the new normal? Is there a new normal? All of those things that we've heard and seen and speculated again amongst ourselves. So Sean, what are your thoughts on kind of that current state of the freight market?
Yeah, so I've been talking all year about how I think we have to wait until probably end of Q2 of next year before this is going to start feeling like really like everybody agrees that we're sort of in recovery of the economy. But I also think we probably have to curb our expectations a little bit, because I think it's going to continue to be challenging overall. I think it just won't be the way it was when it was gangbusters in 2021. I think it's unfair to compare it to that. So if you're doing if you're doing well right now and you're surviving, I think you should give yourself credit. And if you're diving in and finding out where you can improve your processes, I think you're pretty well set up to get through the rest of the market that we're in until Q2 of next year. But I do think there's reason to be optimistic. Boots on the ground. I am hearing two different sentiments. Carriers, on the small fleet owner or operator side, still kind of feeling like it's really tough. Rates need to increase more so that they can feel profitable. A lot of them thinking about leaving. But I'm also hearing a better sentiment on the broker side. So, and that's just through conversations. But in June, we had a record number of imports, right? So I think that helps with the optimism side of things. In the inflation last week, the report that came out said record 3-year low on the inflation side of things. So it doesn't mean prices are down or prices are going to go down, but that allows the Fed to do a rate cut, which probably is going to come next week, it sounds like. And so I think there's several indicators leading to reason to be optimistic. And I think there's really good opportunities for brokers to work with those carriers where the sentiment isn't. I think it's a good opportunity to build strong relationships, knowing that you do have a good sentiment and carrying that sentiment and making sure you're taking care of carriers. But I think all of those things together, there is reason to be optimistic. I think we just have to be careful about it's not just going to be this huge swing. I think you are going to have to be really a really good broker, a really good trucking company, really dialed in on your process to continue to survive through the next 3 quarters here.
Oh, I cannot agree more. It's kind of that time where you really kind of have to know what you're about, and ideally you've spent kind of the last couple months or almost a year at this point in time, or over a year, really kind of honing in on what makes you you and kind of what makes you tick. One of the other things that people are kind of waiting with bated breath about to see how it's going to impact everything is the upcoming presidential election. Carrie, what does that look like on the freight market?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Mary. We're something less than 60 days out from Election Day, and there's a lot of data to suggest from previous, especially presidential election cycles, that obviously they introduce uncertainty in the market. We don't know who's going to win, who's going to be running the country for the next 4 years. That causes business leaders often to delay capital investments. The Fed of San Francisco did a report a couple of years ago that looked at trends over time and found that policy uncertainty around elections can lead to a 6% drop in capital spending by firms in the run-up. After Trump was elected in 2016, there was a massive boom in manufacturing activity kind of in the following days because of anticipation about certain policies that he was going to enact. And we've also seen impacts of from minimum wage increases just across the board. Policy changes, especially when we're not sure exactly what they're going to be, will cause a delay until there's certainty, and then and companies and capital allocators will spring to action once they know more. So across the board, what I think that means for the freight markets, just given that so much demand is predicated on manufacturing activity, don't expect anything big to happen before the presidential election. And if anything, it'll just continue to kind of push out any sort of freight rebound we might see in a non-election year.
So Matt, you're kind of in the trenches on the day-to-day. What are things that you're seeing that is really kind of impacting the industry on that day-to-day operations things? Because we've looked at 2 of the big high-level things. Let's get down in the dirt. What are you seeing?
So the market has been pretty volatile the last year or so. I think with COVID, we see a huge influx of capacity come through, and those guys were making a killing at that point. And as soon as rates dropped, we're now seeing the opposite with a mass exodus of MCs and authorities. I do suspect that the capacity will find a balance here, and like we said, next year, hopefully early. We're seeing a lot of kind of smaller operations kind of fall through the cracks and not be able to survive this kind of down market. I think the in terms of the financial gains from carriers are tight and it's hard. I think with the startup costs, new MCs are pretty difficult to get, and with financial backing for trucks and maintenance and just all the operational costs, it's getting harder and harder for new MCs to come into the market, which likely means that we're going to see a capacity crunch in some markets in a year or so. These things take a while to play out, but I think the market is unpredictable right now. I do know that on the carrier sales end, procuring carriers for long-term projects has been a little bit of a pain. I think a lot of carriers are hoping for a rebound here soon and don't want to commit to large volumes as well. So, I'm hoping that, things can start to level out. We are seeing some, growth of the last couple months, and it's been steady growth, which is a good sign, but nowhere near where we were pre-pandemic though.
I mean, I think at this point, I'll take any growth over no growth because it just seems that we've been in this kind of, I don't want to say a downward spiral, but in a very tough spot. And I know we've seen a bunch of carriers leave the market, as you've mentioned, and we've seen a lot of kind of suffer through until we get to the other side. But nobody quite knows when the other side is coming. And I would like it to be here now, if I can be honest.
Yes, please.
So we'll move to our next one. So Carrie, from your conversations with brokers, how have you seen the conversation shift from focusing on when is it going to shift versus how to handle that actual shift?
Yeah, great question. So if you think back a couple of years after, the big crash in rates in early 2022, I think the common sentiment at that point was, we'll just wait this out, and we got to just hope that the market's going to increase better. And what I've seen is a real shift away from that hope as a strategy over the last 2 years for brokerages. There've been a lot of really difficult decisions that have been made around how do we staff our business, what sort of investments do we make across the board, what sort of metrics do we need to see ourselves hitting, what sort of cash do we need on hand to service debt payments. Just at really top to bottom, it's really challenged every operator. I'm sure Matt, you can talk a lot more about that in detail, but what I've noticed from speaking with brokers, large and small, is that I've seen folks start to shift from this let's wait it out mindset to a let's see what we can do and take advantage of this mindset. There is still a good freight to be won in this market. There are still great carrier relationships to be made. And it's really it's kind of a cultural and mindset shift there. So you got a couple things on the slide. First and foremost, this has been an awesome opportunity to really focus on retention and build really strong relationships with your shippers. I've noticed a lot of brokerages moving more to think about customer retention. How do we, kind of land and then expand within a shipper? Start with a couple of lanes and grow that out, as opposed to just the spray and pray model. Same with on the carrier side. And I think what's also been interesting as the market has been so soft over the last couple of years, combined with a number of other factors, but we've seen, of course, that massive increase in fraud, which has just underscored the importance of carrier relationships. And the fact of the matter is, if you're going to be able to treat a carrier well and work effectively with them through a market like this, they're going to be someone who you can really rely on as the market gets stronger. And those relationships, might be harder to come by because carriers have a lot more choices out there. So I've seen it's a great time to invest in those. I think there was a lot of concern from the, shall we call it the freight tech vendor side of the world. And Sean, you can speak to this too, around when, things hit the fan a couple of years ago, would we see investment in technology go away completely? And it's actually been the exact opposite. Like I'll say, for example, what our core product is load tracking. And what we've noticed is that it's only grown in demand over the last 2 years throughout this down market for two reasons. One is that brokerages need to be really thoughtful about how they get maximum productivity out of every single additional headcount they add. So they're looking at technology as an enabler of that. If we're going from booking 7 loads a day to 10 loads a day, how are we going to get there? You're going to have to provide tools to help those brokers get there, which is a lot cheaper than adding just a whole new carrier sales rep, for example. On the flip side, we've also seen a real drive behind tracking and just tech investment in general, because shippers who have the upper hand right now are demanding so much more of their brokers and carriers and their routing guides. They're demanding higher levels of visibility. They're demanding better payment terms. They're demanding higher service levels. And of course, relationships matter, human relationships matter, like we just talked about, but to be able to deliver that in a really scalable way requires technology. So it's actually been quite the opposite. I don't think brokers have pulled away from tech investment. They've just been a lot more discerning about what is the ROI on this investment? How do I make it work? How do I really focus on implementation across the board? I don't want to just buy this and have a small subset of my my organization use it. I want to make sure when we're using it to its maximum value and everyone knows how to use it. And then, just tying to that third point, reducing time to value. I think that's it's incumbent in any market where one party, like in this case, the shipper, has a lot of kind of outside options. You've got to be able to get in and prove very quickly, white glove service, top to bottom, off that first shipment. There's just not a whole lot of margin for error. So making sure that you've got, that return to service is what one of our customers says. You've got that at the forefront of your mind. Matt or Sean, any thoughts on that? And did anything I say resonate or contradict what you're seeing out there from the brokerage world?
Yeah, absolutely. Fraud is such a big problem now. The customers are not onboarding new brokers at record rates anymore. They are slimming down their broker pools. I think a big part of success right now is retaining what you have and building the customer base that you do have right now. And different tech partners can help assist in that, whether it be additional vetting of the carrier that you'll need in place, or just more efficiency of getting tracking information and updates to the customer. Those things matter. We're in battle of increments right now between different brokerages and other asset carriers. What can we really stand out on other than security and communications?
Yeah, and we've definitely seen not even just companies going out and buying new software, but investing time and looking at their current tech stack to make sure they're getting the most out of it. And that's been a big thing. We did a few case studies recently on companies, some of our customers who retrained their staff, where they had to kind of hone into the core group of people that were really driving their success and try to figure out how to just make their lives easier and the process easier. And so the ability to aggregate carrier data, carrier pricing easily, right? Everything's data, but data means nothing if you don't have an easy way to collect it and then an actual way to display it to your team to make it actionable. And so we did a case study recently on one of our customers who doubled their freight bookings per person per day while also still increasing the margin. And what that came from was they retrained the team around a really smooth process that made it so even if they were posting or if they were going to their own carrier network, it was really easy to see both and do both and know who the favorite carriers were, right? To make it so that their time to get a shipment booked on the carrier rep side was a lot faster. And it just led to the speed to quote on the spot quote side for the shipper. So they were winning more. And that allowed, so it just, everything increased, but it was really just a matter of taking a look at the tech stack they had and finding out like, hey, we have this time where the market is in a little bit of a lull. Let's utilize it. And I think that was a smart attitude to have. It kind of goes back to what Carrie was saying, where the sentiment has turned into like, all right, how do we, like, rather than getting into sort of a toxic productivity, like let's find a way to get more sales and be obsessed with it, right? I think everybody has sort of, or a lot of brokers have shifted into like, how do I get more out of what I have right now? And I think that's a successful strategy. You have to, I just think it's really important right now, and this is true in any market, but right now, if you can improve your carrier network and the relationships you have, and I think you do that not necessarily by sending them gift cards or like things like that. I mean, that helps, but I think what carriers really want to see is they want to see fair pricing. You're not wasting their time. You're coming back to them with the freight that they want, right? They're running lanes that they want to run. If you're doing that regularly, I feel like there's plenty of time to kind of take a deep breath, make sure that's what you're doing, so that when the market does start to turn, you have this vast carrier network where you're not overly dependent on the load boards. The load boards have done a good job cracking down on the carrier fraud, but it is the thing that opens you up to it, right? I mean, you get kind of opened up to it even when you are trying to go back to your network, and that's why all these tools are coming out. But I think you're overly exposed if you have a network on a lane, but you're always posting and praying just because that's the easiest thing to do for your team. I just think you're opening up exposure. You're slowing yourself down, and you're going to get caught in more of those schemes, and you're not going to be able to quote as fast to the customer side.
100%. I think that carrier relationship part is absolutely crucial, and because it goes hand in hand with your speed, like you mentioned, because it literally could come down to a matter of 5 to 10 minutes on getting back to somebody. Because most of the time, if I'm reaching out to somebody for a rate quote, I don't have an hour for them to get back to me. I usually need it done within about 15 minutes. So that's where I think a lot of that speed comes from. So we're going to kind of we're going to dive deeper into some things that you guys brought up earlier, and that is that shipper and carrier relationship. So Matt, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here for a second. Why is this so important to have this shipper and carrier relationship? I know we saw it back in 2020, 2021, when carriers were charging whatever they wanted and shippers kind of had to more or less take it. And now it seems to have flipped. Why is that relationship absolutely crucial?
It's huge for a number of reasons. One, just having a capacity in particular markets will prep you for upcoming customers that haven't hit your boards yet. I suspect an upturn in loads next year. So you want to have carriers in place in certain markets where you feel comfortable in. The second one, obviously, is the theft and fraud prevention. Being able to partner up with companies that have the experience, have the security, have the knowledge to kind of navigate through these ups and downs of this market right now are important. And then stability too. I've had commitments with carriers who've gone out of business mid kind of contract. And what kind of impacts can that have on your team is huge, And now we have to get on the phones and start cold calling for a new partner in that space, which is time out of your day and time away from making money. So it's a hugely important task, and one that's getting more difficult over time. Finding legitimate partners is always kind of a hit or miss. You got to make sure you got people in the right places, and then like I said, carriers are, as anxious as we are about the freight market, they are more so anxious, and they don't want to commit to plans long term if they don't have guarantees or don't have a relationship with a broker. You can't just start from day one with posting out the load boards and praying that gets the job done. You want to go into RFQs with a little confidence and a little prep work in place. So, we put a huge emphasis on procurement this past year. And, not only did we see the stolen claims go down, we saw basic things like pallet shifts get better because we found better partners in that space and guys who knew the account and knew what the shipper was expecting, what the receiver was expecting. We saw less accidents because we have we're not relying on unknown commodities and unknown carriers. We know that this guy is a safe driver and he'll get it from point A to point B. So there's so many trickle down effects from carrier procurement and carrier relations that you don't, initially kind of take in. Your onboarding staff, the people doing the carrier setups, if that can go down, you can kind of, become more efficient on the staffing there and move them into places that are more important. And I think it is the differentiator from a broker trying to wing it on an RFQ and a broker that's prepared and knows what they're doing when they're walking into a particular contract.
So Matt, out of curiosity, have you guys found a secret sauce, if you will, for finding the right carrier? Or is it more just like, you set your risk appetite you kind of set your appetite for risk and then just follow your procedures, and a carrier that typically makes it through there ends up being a pretty successful one? I didn't know if you had like a secret sauce for finding good carriers.
There are certain tools that are better than others, certainly, but ultimately it's a culture that you have to build within your brokerage. There are a lot of old school brokers that I work with that, they post and pray, and a lot of their interpretations of carriers are, not so much that they're enemies, but that they aren't partners. And that's a hard mentality and an attitude to break with some of these old school brokers. And that ultimately will change because we need these guys. They are the people on the front line doing the heavy lifting. And so, being able to establish a historical record of carriers have done this lane, and those guys having first dibs at the load is important. And you have to get that through everyone's head on the ground level at your company. If your carrier sales rep doesn't understand that and just knows that he can post it and get a couple inbounds, it's just like they don't see the heartache that this kind of mentality will have down the road. And it goes from everything from your billing team to your onboarding team, your ops team, your dispatch team. Everyone kind of suffers through that mentality, and you got to catch it up front with your own people and say, hey, these are the steps we do before we post it out to the load board. These are the people you ought to be reaching out to. And then, ideally having these people in place before you go into a new RFQ. Obviously, if you're bidding on spot market, you're going to try to do your best, but having just general markets where you have a pool to reach into and talk to, even if they don't take the load, they can give you advice about that shipper, about that lane, about that rate. And they say, hey, I can't run this, but I have a buddy that can, or, I'm not going to run this, but the rate's actually really good. I'm sure you're going to be able to find carriers. Having that advice from carriers is so important. And I think so many times overlooked, like they are our best partners in this space, and, they are valuable to have those relationships and, exploit those relationships.
Carrie, have you guys seen anything of shippers kind of starting to rely on brokers to vet some of those carriers?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to build on from Matt's point there, is that what we're hearing from our broker customers are that they're getting more and more questions up front from shippers about carrier vetting and carrier visibility. How are you driving consistency? Basically trying to snuff out what is the likelihood of a fraudulent carrier working with this broker. And they're looking at brokerages first and foremost, and kind of doing their own risk assessment based on carrier selection strategy. So I think it's something that's really, to Matt's point about, this isn't something that just like impacts you on this load. Of course, it impacts other folks within the brokerage and having to track down things, billing, finance, AP, compliance, but also the shipper relationship in general is really kind of the ultimate thing that could get impacted, but if you're not thoughtful with your carrier selection strategy.
Sean, have you seen anything in this land of shippers relying on brokers for vetting?
Well, absolutely. I mean, because it's such a heavy issue, I think it's a good opportunity for the broker to present themselves as that expert that can stop them from getting caught in some of these schemes. And I think going back to what Matt was saying, the culture within your company of making sure that you are regularly going back to the same repeat carriers that you already have vetted, right? And you're aggregating the history of those carriers so you can see how reliable they are and how often they're pricing you fairly, and being able to compare that to current market rates. Like making that easy on your team is important. Making sure that the whole company culture understands that, but you can't fake culture either, right? Like you can't tell your team what to do, and like in a perfect world, yeah, they would do it. But when you go and start talking to them, if you haven't made it easy on your team to where if posting is their easiest option, they're going to post, right? They're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be trying to get shipments covered. It's a stressful time. Like people are worried about where the economy is. If you don't make it easy for them to go back to the same carriers and have the data in front of them to negotiate appropriately and not just kind of piss off the carrier, right? Because you're trying to ask them something way too low, then you're not really helping them build that culture that you're looking for. ARL's actually got one of the best cultures I've seen for a company in general, but also like especially for brokers. And it's because they have the goal, and then it's very clear what they put in place to reach those goals. And I think that's what brokers have to look at. You can't just demand that your team does it a certain way. You got to put the right processes in place to make it easy on them.
Oh, 100%. And I think that kind of lends itself nicely into the next section that we were going into. And that is, I feel like shippers really have started relying on their broker and their 3PL partners to make sure that they're to kind of I don't want to say do a lot of heavy lifting for them, but kind of fill in the blanks of things that they need in their supply chain, which ultimately is what you want out of a good partner. And so as a result, shippers have been asking for more technology and asking for more enhancements from their broker partners. But a lot of times brokers are kind of like, well, it's a tight market, you know, we're surviving kind of. Is this really the right time for me to spend potentially millions of dollars to overhaul my software and make all these upgrades? But you're also torn. Do I do it now before the market switches, or do I do it once I know I have a stronger inflow of cash coming in? Sean, what are your kind of thoughts on this? Sean, you are muted.
And you'd think I'd get over that at this point, years with this format. I do think, obviously, I see the opportunities as a tech provider where we can help brokers. So now is always the best time, right? But I do think that you have to expect that the market will get better. It's not gonna stay this way forever. People need freight moved. Our industry is not going anywhere, right? So I think that you utilize the lull to put in technology, or like I said earlier, like at least look at what you have today and make sure you're using it most effectively. Sometimes companies, I've heard a lot of companies doing this, and you know, if it's not built into your workflow, right? Like if you're trying to use say truck tools for their tracking, right, and it's not built into the TMS to make it easy, and they can't leverage all the features, then it's going to be very challenging on your team. So, and I think you have to look at, it's a low margin industry, right? So you got to do a lot of volume, and everybody always wants to look at, well, it's going to cost me X amount more money, but nobody ever looks at what they're going to save. I shouldn't say nobody. I think people need to look at what you will save if you put that process in place with this new technology. Like, I mean, even the freight fraud stuff, like how long is it taking your team to vet out, or getting caught up in these problems and having to mitigate them and things like that if they don't have the right tech, or if they don't have easy ways to track or easy ways to get coverage. It costs a lot more money than I think people think. When we put out an article recently just to try and be helpful in terms of like evaluate these 8 areas of your business, and they're all areas that we feel strongly that most brokers end up spending too much time, and their labor costs go way up, and we're already operating on thin margins. So you got to keep your overhead at a reasonable level, and the tech is what helps you do that. If you put it in place now, you'd be ready for that market turn, hopefully middle of next year.
Carrie, have you guys seen on the trucker tool side kind of this implementation of technology on the rise? Have you seen shippers kind of demanding more from this technology or from their broker partners?
Yeah, big time. It's actually, like I mentioned earlier, it's been a real, frankly, boon to the tracking business over the last couple of months. You know, we've seen massive interest in tracking as a fraud prevention tool, and I think, you know, it used to be like this is a way to automate manual workflow and check calls, or, you know, shippers want compliance. I think fraud is actually kind of the number one reason why you want tracking right now, and a lot of brokerages are training their carrier sales reps. If a carrier's not accepting tracking, next, you know, we're not moving with them. So it's absolutely something we've seen. There's a lot we're doing within our product specifically to prevent fraud. We've actually got quite a few things that we've already gone live with, and we're going to have a big, more formal product release on what all is entailed in that over the next couple of months. But just to give a quick teaser, we've got a lot of integrations with. We've got a lot of tech built that identifies when something's not going right with the product, whether that's there's a bad actor whose server it's hitting based on some information we're getting about IP and VoIP and all of that. We've got off-routing alerts. So when you're tracking a carrier and they're going somewhere that you don't expect them to, that we're able to notify you for that. So there's just top to bottom, there's a lot beyond just the simple fact of are you tracking or are you not that our tech is able to do. Sean did mention too that beyond tracking itself, fraud prevention really starts at the TMS level. Making sure that you have all the tools you need plugged directly in there to pre-vet carriers to make it as simple as possible for your carrier sales reps. I know Matt can probably tell us, but a huge part of actually preventing fraud is making sure that your reps have easy access to the tools they need, and they're totally just they're living day to day in that workflow, as opposed to adding cognitive load for them to shift back and forth between other screens. ARL does that with Highway, I believe. We've got a number of a lot of folks use us as an additional layer of fraud prevention through tracking, through our carrier sourcing tool, having all that information aggregated in a single place, and then implementing smart, good sense workflow around it, like holding off sending a load pickup number until you have confirmation from a carrier and tracking has been initiated from a carrier. That's where we see the biggest impact when you combine all that tech solution together.
I mean, I think that I feel like the entire industry is kind of on that border of like, I almost have too much tech and I have like just the right solution. Because you definitely can get overwhelmed and get too in the weeds and have a solution for everything. But like you said, it interferes with that workflow. It makes it a lot more clunkier. Nobody really wants to go through 10 screens to try and book a single load. So I think that the better that those solutions are is only going to make everyone else better. And hopefully stop some of the bad actors and stop fraud before it even becomes a possibility. Because I think through having good training and having a bunch of people or have kind of like that set standard of procedures of this is what we allow, this is what we don't allow, we won't make exceptions on these. I think that in combination with some of the great technology assets is really kind of that groundwork that you need to make sure that you're not opening yourself up more than necessary to fraud and the risk of fraud. All right, so we are kind of moving into more of I'm going to call it the more exciting part of kind of seeing this integration. And like you mentioned, there is that integrated system. So Matt, can you speak firsthand on kind of the benefits of having this integration, especially kind of as it relates to that fraud conversation? We've touched on how pricing needs to be fast and accurate, but it needs to be fast, accurate, and also not going to someone that's just going to steal my freight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, tracking is a requirement now. When I had first started logistics, many years ago, it was 50 and 50 whether or not the carrier is going to accept your tracking. Now it is certainly a requirement. And having a partner in that space that has a lot of carriers already onboarded, so you don't have to go through that process again, just simplifies the process. Carriers aren't often, drivers are not often tech savvy. And so having those onboarding already established is huge. And Trucker Told does a great job with simplifying the process and not trying to overcomplicate it, add too many bells and whistles. It's like, hey, we want to make sure we're efficient and that our partnership with your TMS is smooth. That like she said, any divot from the route or any kind of suspected notifications of possible issues getting reported right into the TMS system where the dispatchers ought to be living in. That is right now one of my first questions when I interview any tech right now is like, how do you integrate with the TMS system? We can no longer be in a process where you have 25 different tabs open and you have to swivel chair between different things. And it has to live and be recorded within the TMS system. Trucker Tools does a great job. They've been partnered up with Tai for a long time, and Tai in general has great partnerships with a lot of the vetting companies. So you have to find a TMS system that doesn't have the ego that they can figure this all out, and will partner with companies specialized in those areas and say, hey, we're not going to be your best tracking tool. We're going to rely on Trucker Tools and our other partners in that space. Security obviously is going to be huge. With different schemes and networks kind of popping up over the last few years, yes, carrier relationships tracking, hugely important. But how do you mitigate that bottleneck? There is going to be some pain points. Your team will suffer some kind of delays while you're vetting and doing your background checks and make sure they accept the tracking and everything like that. But it's vital at this point. Retention's huge, and you can't lose a customer to a claim. That is my ultimate goal. And a lot of your salesmen, your account managers will hate you for a day because you're telling them no, and they can't do this, they can't do that. But I always tell them, you may, hate me today, but your customers love me going forward. Like I said, not only have we brought down fraud, we brought down safety related and service related issues. So it's essential to find good partners in that space that can help you out and assist you with that and are open to change, open to kind of making divots to the SOP and what workflow makes sense. I think Carrie and her team are great about being transparent. If you want this tracking link sent to your customer so they have full access, it's able to do that. We can have tracking updates emailed directly to us. Like that line of communication can catch things in progress. And, once it's left the shipper, you only have a certain countdown before it's gone for good. And so you have to act quick. You have to get these notifications quick and in place and be able to alert authorities when this stuff happens. And if you have a TMS system that's in a tracking system that's forcing you to have 25 different tabs open while you're trying to manage, 1,000, 2,000 different loads a year or a month, it's impossible. And so you need those partnerships in place. It's important.
I think that that's the ultimate definition of short-term sacrifice, long-term gain, is like, it's just going to be really inconvenient while you vet these and kind of try out different things that work for you. But then, and when you implement it, it's going to suck and it's not going to be fun for like a month, but then it'll be fine. It'll be great. And it'll be wonderful. We are going to have a poll on the screen just for anyone that would like more information on either option. But while everybody answers those poll results, Carrie and Sean, as technology providers, how have you guys said, okay, because one of the things Matt mentioned was you need to be able to have that provider that kind of throws the ego out the window and says, yes, I'm going to utilize these partnerships. What about what made you guys say, okay, yes, like we are open to partnerships. This is something that we want to continue to pursue. Carrie, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, we come to life through our integrations. One of our sales reps says, I don't sell trucker tools, I sell trucker tools integrations. Like that is bottom line how our product works. And being part of, we consider ourselves kind of an extension of a TMS and just like a very, very valuable vertical workflow add-on to a TMS. And the integration is how the product works. So it's fundamental to who we are as a business to have strong partnerships, especially with TMS providers, because that is the lifeblood of a freight brokerage. If we weren't there, we're fully aware that our brokers aren't interested in using us. So it's just fundamental to what we do.
And Sean, what about you?
I completely agree. I mean, as a TMS provider, we're a workflow optimization tool, right? And so like our efforts get to be focused on things like just making it feel very easy. It's all on one screen. We know what a broker has to do. They gotta bring in quotes and emails coming from their customers, right? And they need to be able to actionably work those, get load coverage, things like that. And they're going to use tools that have been in the industry for a long time, and we have to be willing to build those into that optimized workflow for them. And so that's why we get to focus on things like last year we put out a workflow automation builder. So a user-friendly way to kind of set up your own processes to create some automation within your function. We get to focus on stuff like that because we have partners like Trucker Tools that has actually been our fastest growing tracking partner over the last few years. And there's no secret to me why. Like they do a good job they integrate with even, some of what you would consider their competitors, but it allows for the broker to not need to buy every single tracking tool. Instead, they can get those tracking updates pulled into Trucker Tools, and then we're pulling them right back into Tai so that you're staying within Tai. And we got to make it easy on them, right? So from a workflow standpoint, you send out that rate con, we can make it so you require the driver's phone number. It goes in, and then it's easy to automatically start that Trucker Tools tracking and then see your tracking updates. And what you had seen on the previous screen was what it looks like within Tai when you hit the little pop-up for tracking on your internal load board page. It makes it so that you can see that the tracking's already started. You can see what's going on with the carrier. We have to be able to do things that are backups to prevent fraud or prevent things like we have a texting feature where if like all of a sudden driver's going, hey, I just can't get it downloaded. It's like, well, we make it so you can at least send a text ping that allows us to at least capture one IP, right? So we get a data point for where they are right now, in case they are BSing you, right? About like, oh, I can't get this to download or whatever. But we as tech providers, we have to be, there's so many cool technologies in the industry, especially like just so many enhancements over the last few years across the board in multiple tech companies. We have to be able to make it easy for our customers to use those features without having, like Matt said, without having a big ego about oh, we can build everything, right? I don't think that's the right attitude. I think there's a lot of cool companies and we got to partner with them.
1,000%. So we're going to move on from our poll, but I think we have enough time for one more little point. But in the meantime, while we're kind of covering this last point, if there's any questions that you have, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A box because we will get to them right after we wrap up the kind of, that importance that comes to being proactive. So as we all know, a lot of brokers are going to have to start making that switch to being proactive about rates and responding to the market versus being reactive. And a lot of that comes with, reducing the time it takes to return a rate quote. So Sean, why is this so important for brokers to kind of make that mindset shift from being reactive to proactive?
You got to know where the industry's headed. I mean, on this graph, you're seeing just the amount of investment going into Mexico, right? And that's, post-pandemic, it just taking too long to get, commodities or different things that you might need as a U.S. company. So knowing that trend is coming and building up your network in a way that allows you to leverage what probably is going to happen, which is a lot more freight coming in from Mexico instead of what it's been in past years. But I think you got to leverage technology to be able to quickly get back to your customers on any update. Brokers provide an excellent service by being the expert, right? So fast response times, being able to respond really quickly is super, super important to the overall. So you got to leverage technology to pull in your customers' questions and respond to them. If you're doing things the way where in order to get a quote to a shipper, you are waiting until you get a bunch of load board quotes and then picking the best one and then responding, you're going to lose every time. And now your overhead's going up for quotes that you're not winning, right? So you have to find a way to bridge the gap and be able to use data and aggregated data to respond quickly to things like that and then get coverage faster.
So Matt, kind of after that, how has ARL been working to kind of strengthen that cross-border offering? Because it's something that in my opinion, all brokerages and all 3PLs are going to need to have a solution on how to handle cross-border freight, whether or not they choose to have that be a specialty that they offer. I feel like that's something that everyone's going to at least have to know how to manage. So how have you guys been working to strengthening that for your organization?
Sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of different elements to this that you have to get prepped for and train your staff for. Everything from the operational hiccups that can happen during the crossing and the delays that can be caused. And then how do you source a carrier that can do this work? You know what I mean? There hasn't been, if you're a company that hasn't done it historically, like where do you start, And it's really, luckily we have a bit of experience doing it. So we have some carriers we can lean on and then expanding those relationships from there. But, now is the time. This is really a historic moment. These trade partners are really picking up in Mexico and having, warehousing and having capacity down on that border is going to be huge. We obviously know fraud is a huge issue in Southern Texas, and being able to identify the right carriers, having those SOPs in place, having the tracking in place and the dispatch team on point to understand like, hey, these things are real problems and that we have to have special attention to. Educating your staff to understand that, and getting the right pieces in place, being able to find bilingual people and be able to communicate with the carriers and the shippers down there accurately is important. And so, we've done a lot in terms of, aggregating data based on our historical loads in that areas, being able to, identifying certain staff members that we, think are key players in certain positions that we are going to really build up and flesh out their roles that they can kind of impact the carrier relations down there. And then, ultimately just having partners in that space that'll be able to provide that data to you is difficult. But I think we have a lot of good pieces in place. It's just right now getting out there and getting on the phones, and making those connections, being able to, have someone that you can reach out to and have a dedicated carrier on these lanes is important because they're going to know the ins and outs and special kind of routes you do and don't take down there and really understanding kind of what those delays and changes look like on a day-to-day basis. You're going to want to have experience down there. So, I definitely advise as your customer base starts to move down there, you start to move your carrier base down there.
I think that everything I've heard that when people are saying they're preparing for operations in Mexico, it all comes down to you have to know a guy who knows a guy. And I think I think now is the perfect time to try and find the guy who knows the guy. That being said,
Yeah.
I think, oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh yeah, I was just going to completely jump in on that and just, I think, tie it up, which is where I think we're going anyway. But I think the Mexico cross-border piece is just a great example of taking advantage of time in this down market, figuring out how can I anticipate what a shipper's needs are and really being proactive about that, going to them saying, hey, you need this, that, and this. We've already got it covered. We've already doing this. Again, all in service of reducing that time to value.
Oh, 1,000%. And I am excited for kind of the impending chaotic future of cross-border freight with Mexico. So that leads us now to our Q&A portion. So if there's any questions that you guys have, feel free to submit them in the Q&A box and we will get to answering them. I'm going to start one off here. Is there anything more important than carrier vetting with the amount of fraud in the industry? Carrie, start us off.
Nope, nothing more important. Working with trusted, reputable carriers is the number one thing you can do right now to help your business grow or to absolutely tank it overnight.
Matt, is this something that from the operations standpoint, you guys really put a heavy emphasis on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's oftentimes the simplest things that go the farthest, being able to establish certain relationships, procuring ahead of time. Those are ultimately going to be your best partners in this space. Obviously, you want to be able to track with the efficiency and be able to get the historical data about which carriers you should target more than others. But understand that there are going to be some pains through this process. There are going to be good carriers that get denied, and there are going to be, bad carriers that do slip through the cracks. But ultimately, we're in it for the long run, and so you have to take that approach where it's just like, tomorrow it's not going to get fixed. Next year it's not going to get fixed. I suspect this fraud is only going to get worse. How do we work within our own means to secure our freight, our shippers' freight, and make sure that, if we're giving $200,000 worth of cargo to someone, it's going to make it to delivery. So it's hugely important.
Sean, have you guys seen, kind of in that same vein, have you seen a lot of, when you do find a bad actor or you do find a carrier that is a little less than desirable, we'll call them that. Do you see kind of that spread like wildfire through kind of the network? Do you see everyone say, oh, okay, we know this person's bad, we're going to just cut, like everyone kind of cuts them off?
Yes, if they're set up correctly. I mean, to piggyback on what Carrie and Matt are saying, if you're a broker and you don't have a good carrier network, it's really hard for you to provide a top tier service. Right. I mean, that is kind of a big part of, it's the biggest part of what they're doing for shippers. And so if you have it set up correctly, like if there's some bad actors, you'll spot it quickly. Everybody will know, everybody within your company, even, other brokers that like the word of mouth will spread pretty quickly. But, these guys they've gotten pretty advanced in some of these tactics that they use. And so if you don't have good ways to spot it, like, you can end up accidentally using that carrier again, right? Like it's still in your network, or maybe you deleted it, but you posted on the load board, you got caught by the same one. And it's like, you have to have the tools in place to spot this.
Carrie, is this something that you guys have heard a lot from feedback-wise at Trucker Tools of wanting to know kind of what is happening with other brokers and any potential bad actors that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a main value prop of our carrier sourcing tool as well, where you're able to actually take a look and understand what is the behavioral portrait of this carrier over the last 6 to 12 months. What lanes are they running? What's their tracking compliance look like? So you can better understand, is this someone who's easy to work with, more difficult to work with? They're telling me they're going to run this lane, no problem, but they don't actually have any activity history there. What's going on?
I like that. Just kind of the like subtle red flags that just get raised of like, hey, you should maybe double check this.
Exactly.
All right, so we have another question. This one's directed at Sean. Considering the record high import volumes, what are your thoughts on entering the drayage market as a relatively inexperienced broker? Do you have any advice or insights?
I do have a couple of thoughts on that, but it might be actually better to let Matt answer that, since ARL does a pretty good amount of drayage. So Matt, if you want to take that.
My advice is take your time with it. Prior to working at ARL, I had only done just your typical over-the-road drayage and reefer, and I thought I knew most of what there is to logistics. I thought I had a good handle on it, and then I started working on drayage. There are so many accessorials. There's so many operational changes. The leverage between over-the-road carriers and drayage carriers is much different. That relationship is much different. Everything from how they accept and do rate cons is different. So, take your time and go about it very slowly. Don't start promising customers huge volumes or anything like that. Get familiar with the ports, where they are, some of their operationals, what are the requirements to get in and out of this port. Really, really take a deep dive into it before you just jump into it. It's not something I would bid on the spot market just randomly. And not, your typical carriers don't go for these loads. So a lot of guys don't even know where to start. The DAT doesn't do a great job with drayage and those load board types. So it's important to get yourself established and experienced beforehand, because there's so much that everything from dispatching to tracking, everything changes with drayage. It seems like it would be simpler. It is much more difficult. So my biggest advice is just get experience with it and take it slow and really do a deep dive before you start accepting freight for that type of work.
Try to build a network first on those drayage carriers, because it is a whole different set of requirements for those trucking companies. For them to be able to enter the port, there's a separate set of insurance requirements, like filing requirements, all this different stuff. So make sure that you have it. Just to Matt's point, you can't just try to quote it off of data that you have on dry vans and things like that. It's completely different. So it's actually, I think it's a really good opportunity. There's a lot of freight coming in through the ports. But I think you gotta have that network set up, and you gotta know that they've let them teach you a little bit. Let some of those carriers teach you a little bit about it. Be humble and accept the advice on what they know they need to be able to get in and out of the port and things like that.
Carrie, do you have any pro tips on ports and on drayage?
Nothing to add from what these guys did. The biggest point that I'd underscore is that it is a different carrier world, and it is not a one-to-one match. So you got to be really thoughtful about, how do I get kind of a bellwether, and how do I start working with carriers who are a good fit?
Yeah, all I know about drayage is that it's I continue to avoid it if possible. But that's just me. I know that I'm not built for that. I know I'm not built for that type of freight. So I think we have enough time for one more question really quickly. And that is, do you guys have any advice on building carrier relationships when you're trying to build business well outside of your normal lanes or areas that you operate, or regular areas that you operate? Matt?
Yeah, I have a lifetime advice I could give you, but ultimately it's just, first be targeted. Don't go into this making empty promises to carriers or, hey, I have a potential freight when you really don't. I've learned that lesson pretty hard. So first, know which market you want to go into, which one that you're expecting freight from. Ultimately, they're going to come back to you for the work. So, you have to have the work. I remember when I was doing an old bottled water customer, and we were trying to expand how much of the RFQ that we were bidding on. It started off very slowly, cold calling, just trying to get established with those guys, and then kind of building it off of, hey, I have potential work. Do you want to partner with me in pricing? And I relied heavily on those guys in their participation with the pricing element. I didn't bid on an RFQ and then tell these guys, the rate is what the rate is. I relied on them because they were going to be my first options when I did get that load, 3-4 months from now. So ultimately, start slow, be targeted, use, your different tools out there. Really rely on the guys that are already in your system that maybe you haven't done work with in a while, or not consistent work, the spot carriers. Try to target those guys and transition them from a one-off carrier or 2 loads a month guy, and try to expand from there. In the same way that we're trying to retain customers due to fraud, let's retain the good carriers and expand what we already do with them. You'd be surprised what your current carrier base is capable of. So much more than I originally thought. I thought we were drier in certain areas than what we really were. I just didn't have a deeper kind of look at, the extra accounts that these guys were doing that weren't for us. So, really, like I said, just go into it expecting a lot of no's, and and make it a true partnership though. When it comes to the RFQ process, don't exclude them in that process and just tell them the rate is what the rate is. It also helps on the shipper end of saying, like, I didn't come up with these rates. Like, these are dedicated rates from real carriers that are expected to take your freight when this goes live. Having that level of confidence that you're being able to take to your shipper actually goes a long way of saying, like, these guys aren't promising me some absorbent rate that they're never actually going to accomplish, and then I'm going to have to put this on the spot market when they fail on this stuff. It's like, no, I'm going in there with confidence and say, hey, I literally have 4 carriers. Bing, bing, boom. Here are their names. Like, I'm ready to roll with these guys. Here's the rate. And having that kind of connection with those guys and participation from those guys. I mean, too often we kind of, kick the can on involving these guys until you actually get the tender and when you actually get the load. But start that process as soon as possible and get these guys' eyes on these things.
Real quick, I know we're about to jump, but
Matthew.
Matthew Hurst, please shoot me an email and I can answer your question in detail. kjablonski@truckertools.com.
Yes, there are a couple questions we didn't get around to. So if anyone has those questions, or if anyone has additional questions, feel free to reach out. We can get those answered. And other than that, I think that pretty much wraps up our time today. Thank you, everyone, for hanging around. I know we went a little bit over. And yeah, I'll hand back over to Emily.
Excellent. Yes, as Mary said, that is all the time that we do have for today. Thank you to everyone again for taking the time to listen in, and a big thank you to Carrie, Sean, Matt, and Mary for sharing your insights with us today. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone via the email you used to register with. We hope you'll join us again for our next FreightWaves webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.